Hi, my name is Laura, and welcome to my podcast, Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations, and through these discussions, you will hear why 9 times out of 10, the book wins. I'll also share different behind-the-scenes trivia I've discovered in my research, which by learning makes the story all the more interesting. If you love either books, movies, or both, this is the perfect podcast for you. This probably already goes without saying, but there will be spoilers for both the book and the movie in this podcast. So if you plan on reading the book or watching the movie, go do that first, and then come back and listen to this. And now, without further ado, let's get right into it. Thanks for joining me. Today we are talking about What's Eating Gilbert Grape, a novel written by Peter Hedges, published in 1991. And the movie by the same name is directed by Lasse Hallström, and it was released in 1993. So the synopsis, it is a story told from the perspective of Gilbert Grape, a 24-year-old who lives at home with his 2 sisters, mentally handicapped brother, and their hugely obese mother. This could be considered a coming-of-age story as it centers on a short time period in Gilbert's life where there are big changes that are happening which cause him to grow and change. For starters, he's having an affair with a married woman and he decides to end things with her. Shortly after this, the woman's husband dies and she moves away. There's also a new girl that comes in town that Gilbert falls for, and she brings out another side of him in a way. Plus, his brother is having his 18th birthday, which is a big deal. And then in the end, his mom dies. So all of these things, of course, impact Gilbert. My thoughts on the book. Initially, I really disliked Gilbert and all the other characters too, for that matter. Gilbert was just so negative about everything and was very disingenuous with everyone he talks to. But then as the story continues, I got less annoyed with him and felt for his situation. Then I was surprised how emotional the ending made me feel. Ultimately, I actually ended up loving this book, something I hadn't anticipated on. I liked how Gilbert would tell us what was on his mind, then would end up saying something that didn't match what he was thinking. This is one of the reasons I found him annoying early on, because this showed what a phony he was. But as it went on, I enjoyed this style. You also get to see his endearing qualities as you walk in his shoes, so to speak. And you can't totally blame him for the way he acts out in some ways. And in the end, he comes to peace with a lot of things that he had been struggling with internally and has a very satisfying character arc. There are things about this book that made me cringe, but I think they were a combination of, one, a different time period. And so for one, mentally handicapped people were referred to differently, treated differently. And 2, an example of just small town people / hicks. For example, even though Gilbert clearly loves his mental handicapped brother Arnie, he often refers to him as the retard. Obviously, this is a slur in today's day and age, and it seemed negative when Gilbert used the term too, but at the same time, maybe it wasn't such a bad word back then as it is now. So maybe it wasn't, I don't know. It made me uncomfortable though when he said it in the book. But again, I don't know. It was a different time period. Small town. And then there's a new girl in town, Becky, and she's only 15 years old and all the guys in town are going crazy over her. Guys who are 10 plus years older than her. This though could also be looked at different considering it's the late 80s, early 90s and they're small town folk on top of that. But it's still gross. And even in the 80s, 90s, it seems too recent a time for it to have been okay for a 25-year-old to date a 15-year-old. Then his youngest sister, Ellen, she's said to be the prettiest girl in town. And there are like 2 or 3 times where she makes some kind of sexual comment to Gilbert, her brother. For example, he finds her really annoying, and so he's often upset with her. And she says how he's just angry because she's his sister and he's mad that he can't have sex with her. So uncomfortable things like that, which again, I guess can be chalked up to the fact that they're small town people, like bordering on hicks. I don't know. But speaking of small towns, I did like how excited the character Tucker, Gilbert's friend, was about the burger barn chain coming to town. He's so filled with hope and excited to work there and feels like this is going to be the key to a better life. And once he's working there, he takes such pride in the business and in a very endearing way. And this is just a good example of small town life because no one in a city would be feeling this optimistic about some fast food place opening up in town. On to the movie. I had seen this movie before, but it was 15 years ago now. Even so, I had a fairly clear memory of what it was about, so I did go into the book knowing what would happen, assuming the book and movie were similar. This movie is most well known for Leonardo DiCaprio's performance as Arnie Grape, as well as Darlene Cates, who plays Mama. And the script was actually adapted by the author of the book, Peter Hedges. After this, he went on to be a screenwriter, adapting other scripts as well. So this book and movie really changed his life and his career. And since the author himself is the one who adapted the story, it made me feel like I couldn't be too upset about changes that were made, since the author himself apparently made the changes. Though I'm sure there were things the director wanted to do a certain way or something, and Hedges had to go along with it. But still, having that in mind gave me a different outlook on the movie, though there are, of course, still changes that I wasn't a big fan of. So with the acting, we have Johnny Depp, who is in the lead role of Gilbert. In the book, Gilbert is said to be 24, and here Depp is 30, so it's not too far off. Though the movie never specifies his age. Anyway, I think Depp is a great actor, and he's really good in this. I don't think it's his best role ever, and he does kind of get outshined by DiCaprio. But having said that, he is great here, and he has great chemistry with the other characters, especially Juliette Lewis and Leonardo DiCaprio. He also has some scenes with Mama, which are also very touching. Leonardo DiCaprio plays Arnie Grape, the special needs brother. DiCaprio was 19 at the time, and this role got him his first of many Oscar nominations. At the time, he was in the running to be the main kid in the movie Hocus Pocus, but Gilbert Grape interested him more. Everyone was telling him to do Hocus Pocus because it was offering more money, but he is quoted as saying, "I decided I'll audition for this movie Gilbert Grape. If I don't get that, I'll do Hocus Pocus. I found myself trying so hard, investing so much time and energy into Gilbert Grape, and I just worked so damn hard at it, and I finally got it. It was such a weight off my shoulders." And I like how he talks about how hard he was working. Clearly, he's a talented actor, but too often people think that if someone has a natural talent, it means that they don't have to work hard. And that's not true. Talent is such a small thing. Like, if you're going to be successful at something, you can't just have talent. You need to put in hours and hours of work, and that's how you succeed. But he is amazing as Arnie. I'm sure some people today would think it's inappropriate to have someone who doesn't have a mental handicap playing someone who does. But isn't that the point of acting? Like, I get that there's a line here, like having a white person play a person of color is inappropriate. But acting is about pretending to be someone you aren't. If we keep saying a person can't play a certain character because they aren't dealing with what that actual character is dealing with, like, that's not even acting then at that point. And yeah, I think people are being a bit too extreme about that in some ways. And then we have Darlene Cates in the role of Mama. A couple of years prior, she made an appearance on a daytime talk show called Sally Jessy Raphael in a segment called Too Heavy to Leave the House. She had been housebound prior to the show for like 5 years, partly due to health issues, but also by choice because she didn't want to go out in public. Someone in relation to Gilbert Grape saw her on the show, and so they reached out to her to play Mama. Kate said, "I had to make a choice. I could stay where I was and be miserable, or I could take a risk and do something exciting. I talked to author Peter Hedges because there were some things in the book I didn't like. We talked about those extensively, and I trusted him. As we went along, I was so proud of the way the character was portrayed, and so proud of the way the children came around to see that this woman had these good qualities, and how much she really did care about her family." And as far as acting, she does an amazing job. This movie made her character more likable, and there are some scenes in particular that I'm sure were added due to her conversation with Hedges. And Roger Ebert said of her performance, "Darlene Cates, making her movie debut, has an extraordinary presence on the screen. We see that she is fat, but we see many other things too, including the losses and disappointments in her life, and the ability she finds to take a grip and make a new start." Juliette Lewis is Becky, and I think she was perfect for this role. I thought it was an odd choice to give her short hair, but aside from that, she was perfect. Mary Steenburgen is well cast as Betty Carver, the attractive older woman Gilbert is sleeping with. And then John C. Reilly and Crispin Glover play Tucker and Bob, Gilbert's friends. Reilly, you will of course recognize from all the comedies he has since been in. Prior to comedy, he was in a lot of dramas, such as Gilbert Grape, and here he is great as Tucker. And Crispin Glover, you will recognize from the Back to the Future movies, where he plays Marty's dad. So onto the differences. I will begin with the Grape children. For starters, Ellen, the youngest Grape, she was so annoying in the book. There are the weird comments she makes, which I mentioned, but she's also just so lazy and unhelpful. Amy and Gilbert have to do so much, and anytime Ellen is asked to do something, all she does is complain and make smart aleck remarks. She's also very social and is always going out on dates and with her friends. The movie shows all of this to some extent, but not as much as the book. She also doesn't help much with Arnie, and one day Amy asks her to go get him because he's somewhere in town. And so she's trying to get him to come back home. And Gilbert is driving by and he sees her literally dragging him. And so Gilbert gets out of the car and he yells at her and like is mad for her for treating Arnie so poorly. This scene is shown in the movie, but she's trying to get Arnie away from the water tower and she's being rough with him. So it makes a bit more sense in that scenario because getting him away from the water tower was a bigger deal. Whereas in the book, she was being rough with him because she was simply just losing patience. And the book also talks about how when there's a crowd around, she will act like she's the most doting sister to Arnie. So she's just all around a lazy fake. And then we have Amy. She is the oldest of the Grapes. She's 10 years older than Gilbert. In the book, she's pretty overweight herself, though of course not nearly as bad as Mama. In the book, you could always feel the stress she was under as she was basically the head of the household. And you almost felt like she was just going to crack at any minute. Gilbert and she are close, and they are the main two that help support each other because both of them are under a lot of stress. The movie just didn't convey the strain she was constantly under. They also have her be skinny. And the scene where Arnie's cake drops is a big deal in both the book and the movie because for one, it means Gilbert has to go to Foodland to get a new one. But in the book, it feels more devastating because when you're frayed at both ends, which that's a term, right? Frayed at both ends. When you're under that, when you're that stressed and frayed, a seemingly small thing can feel like the end of the world. And in the movie, Amy, of course, was upset about the cake, but she just didn't show the emotions that the book Amy had felt. The book also went into more detail about how Amy has been spending so much time on this cake and on Arnie's birthday. And on to Arnie. In the book, Arnie was also getting chubby, whereas DiCaprio is skinny. But aside from that, there really weren't any other differences to his character. Like there's scenes that changed, but the character himself stays true to how he was in the book. And then we have Larry and Janice. So in the intro of the movie, it mentions that there's another grape named Larry, but that he moved away. And in the book, there are actually two grapes that moved away, both of whom are somewhere in between Amy and Gilbert's age. Janice went to college for psychology, then becomes a flight attendant, and she will call home and visit a handful of times every year. No one really knows what Larry does, what his job is, but he comes home one day a year on Arnie's birthday. He'll arrive in the morning and then he leaves in the evening. And both Larry and Janice send a check home every month to help support the family. Albert Grape is the dad who died. In the book, we are told that Larry is the one who found their dad hanging in the basement. In the movie, it never specifies who found him. In the book, it also talks about how Mama would talk about Albert and talking about how he was always saying sorry and what good is sorry. This is the only insight we really get into his character. It seems that even before she gained all that weight, Mama was just always getting on to Albert for some reason or another, and she was just kind of a difficult person to live with. And it sounds like Albert was just kind of a pushover. In the book, we learned that Gilbert cried the day his dad died and that he hasn't cried since. And he was in second grade at the time, so it's been 17 years. And when they have to install the support beams because Mama's weight is making the floor sink, it just so happens to be in the same spot where Albert had been found hung. So on to Mama. For most of the book, we only see the negative side of her because Gilbert has a lot of negative feelings about her. In the book, there is a moment where she chokes and he and Amy do their best to help, but she's too big for the Heimlich. However, Gilbert is able to dislodge the food nonetheless. In the moment, he's thinking how he doesn't want her to die, but then later he's talking to Becky and he sort of makes it seem like he kind of wishes she had. So it shows that he just has a lot of complicated emotions about her. In the book, Arnie is definitely her favorite child, and she's always repeating, "I just want to see my boy turn 18. Is that too much to ask?" In the movie, they do have this line, but it's repeated more often in the book. In both, there's a part where she is sleeping and Gilbert turns the TV off because she sleeps in the living room and the TV is literally on 24/7 and he's tired of it. So he turns it off, and when he does, she stirs in her sleep and sort of wakes up. And then he turns it back on and she falls asleep again. And so he keeps doing this and she keeps responding the same way. And in the book, we hear Gilbert's thoughts about how this makes him feel like his mom is more aware of the TV than him, has more of a connection to the TV than she does her own son. There's also a character in the book named Lance who went to school with Gilbert, and then he went on to be a news anchor. Everyone loves Lance, and his mom will make Gilbert feel less than because he didn't achieve what Lance did. The movie gives us a scene with her and Gilbert, where she tells him that she never meant to get this way and that she doesn't want to be a joke, and Gilbert comforts her, and it's a really touching scene. Later, Becky comes over and he asks Mama if she can meet Becky, And since Becky is a good non-judgmental person, Mama sighs doesn't bother her, and it's a good moment between the three of them and helps Gilbert have stronger love for his mom. The book didn't really have any touching scenes between him and Mama, though, and Becky never met her. There is a part in the book where Mama says to Gilbert, "I see you, and I know that I am a god, or a goddess, godlike. And this house is my kingdom. Yes, Gilbert, this chair is my throne, and you, Gilbert, are my knight in shimmering armor." Shining, I think, Mama, is what you mean. No, I know what I mean. You don't shine, Gilbert, you shimmer. You hear? You shimmer. The movie also has her calling Gilbert her knight in shimmering armor, but it doesn't have that before a talk about her being a goddess. And so it's like said in a different context, and so it's more touching, whereas in the book it doesn't seem like a touching moment. And we can guess that she tells Gilbert that he shimmers, not shines, because he hasn't allowed himself to live up to his potential. Not only that, but he also hasn't allowed himself to be happy and to fully shine. Shimmering also means the light is reflected, and Gilbert lives for others, and so he reflects their light rather than let his own shine. And speaking of Gilbert, he seems to have a martyr complex. He puts others' needs before his own and is miserable for it. It causes him to feel resentment towards his family because he has sacrificed so much, yet he feels he doesn't get the credit he deserves. When someone has a martyr complex, also sometimes called a victim's complex, they don't let themselves be happy and are pretty much always miserable and blaming those around them, those they are making the sacrifices for their misery. This often happens to someone who has an unhealthy relationship with someone with an addiction. Mama obviously has a food addiction, and it is affecting everyone in the family. Gilbert seems to have the biggest martyr complex about it, though. Ellen just isn't letting her, she's just living her life doing whatever. Arnie is special needs, so it's a little different. And Amy has sacrificed a lot, but she seems to not be as resentful, I guess. But we're also not in her head. I don't know. Maybe she has a martyr complex too. But this is shown with Gilbert in the movie pretty well. The book shows it more, of course, but that's to be expected since we are spending the entire book in his head. There is a scene, though, in the movie where Becky asks what he wants, and he can only think of things he wants for the benefit of others, specifically Arnie and Mama. When Johnny Depp was talking about this movie in an interview, he said how love can be painful, and there's a fine line between love and resentment. So even if you don't have a martyr complex, love can be difficult and painful, and as he says, there's a line between doing something for someone out of love versus doing it because you feel like you have to, and then it turns into a resentment. Ultimately, in every relationship, whether it's with family, friends, or a romantic relationship, you need to do what you feel good about. If you do something you don't really want to do, you simply resent the person you did it for. I'm not saying to be selfish, though, because if whatever it is really important to the person you love, you can try to find a way to do it in a way that you'll feel good about, or that you'll, find a way for you to enjoy it too. Because you can't just keep making sacrifices for people and then feel contempt when they start taking it for granted because it has just become the norm. You gotta speak up for yourself and not live your life for someone else. Anyway, in both, Arnie goes through a phase where he refuses to have water touch him. In the book, this goes on for a couple of weeks at least. And Gilbert tries all sorts of ways to get Arnie in the water, but nothing works. And so he's just getting incredibly dirty. Amy says that it's Gilbert's only job is to make sure Arnie is clean for his birthday party. And the night before the party, all the girls are gone because they took Mama to the beauty salon after hours to get done up for her party, or for Arnie's party. Gilbert is alone with Arnie, and he sees that Arnie has stuck his hand into the Foodland cake, and Gilbert has just had it, and he drags Arnie up into the tub, and he ends up hitting him repeatedly. He stops when Arnie is saying something about his eye, which, by the way, in the book, Arnie has one glass eye because years prior, one of the siblings accidentally threw a dart into it. Anyway, after this, he takes Arnie to bed. The girls return home, and Gilbert feels terrible, and he feels like he needs to confess someone what he has done, but he doesn't. So instead, he just goes to sleep, and everybody else does. But he still feels so guilty, so he decides to get out of bed and go and apologize to Arnie right now. When he goes into Arnie's room, though, he's gone. And so Gilbert drives around, and he finds him in the school pool with Becky, and he's clean. Gilbert is so overwhelmed with gratitude that he cries for the first time in 17 years. He thanks Becky, and then when he gets Arnie in the car, they hug. And it says, "We hold each other. There's a battle to see who can squeeze the hardest. Either Arnie forgot or he forgives too easily." In the movie, after he hits Arnie, he drives off and is gone for a while. Then he sees Arnie and Becky swimming in the lake. So while Gilbert is like up watching, Amy is driving looking for Arnie, and they find him with Becky, and so they take Arnie back. And so after Arnie is taken back home, Gilbert shows himself to Becky, and the two of them spend the night together. When Gilbert comes back the next day, they all know what he did, and he apologizes to Arnie, who forgives him. And then Mama is also upset with him, but he apologizes and they make up. In the book, there's a scene between him and Mama where she is unhappy with her life, but it doesn't end up being as touching a scene as the one in the movie. In the book, she talks about how she is making the floor sink in and how her kids all want to kill each other, and then she tells Gilbert to tell her that he hates her. And he's hesitant, but then she pushes him, so then he says it. After he says it, it reads, "Mama's eyes seem to swell. She looks at me hard and long. She thought she would enjoy my hate, but it has broken her. I can't watch, so I barrel out of the house." And this happened a couple days before she died. And after this happens, like the next morning and stuff, he feels guilty about it, but he doesn't apologize or bring it up because she literally asked him to say it. And so he just doesn't want to bring it up. So in the book, you could feel Gilbert's building frustration and resentment about everything. So when he starts hitting Arnie, you kind of aren't too surprised. He also had been trying so hard again and again to get Arnie to bathe, and nothing was working. Whereas in the movie, he didn't really seem to try too hard, or try at all really, to get to bathe Arnie. The movie also just didn't have that building negative feeling, because the times that should have been so frustrating would have some kind of lighthearted music playing in the background that made whatever was happening just feel like a fun childhood memory type of thing. When in the book, he would get genuinely annoyed with Arnie and couldn't stand him, even though he also loved him. And we as the reader could feel that frustration and feeling like we too were at our wits' end, just like Gilbert is. And there wasn't any lighthearted feel the way the movie added. And in the book, the whole family is there for Arnie's birthday, including Janice and Larry, plus some friends who are invited over. And later in the days, the party is kind of coming to a lull. Arnie says he wants to go to Burger Barn. In the movie, Gilbert was at the Burger Barn opening, but in the book, he refuses to go there because he hated anything that was corporate. But since it's for Arnie, he goes on his birthday. And when they get there, the table is set up for them so that they can order as if at an actual restaurant. And there's also a cake brought out, and they sing happy birthday to Arnie. Tucker, Gilbert's friend, is the assistant manager, and he's the one who orchestrated the whole thing. And Gilbert is so touched and full of gratitude that he goes to the back and he gets teary as he thanks Tucker, so crying for the second time in 17 years. This scene, as well as any talk of Gilbert not having cried in years up until the night before the party, is left out of the movie. Though there is a scene where he's talking about his dad, and he's saying how when he was alive, you could never get a reaction out of him, as if he was already dead. Becky then says, "Sounds like someone I used to know." Of course, she is referencing Gilbert and how he has started to be more open and expressive than he was when they first met. Speaking of Becky, in the book, all she did was get on my nerves, basically. In some ways, this seems fitting, though, since she is only 15 after all. And of course, she's going to be annoying and immature. And she and Gilbert just have kind of an odd friendship/relationship in the book. And they just have one kiss in the book. And there's a scene where she invites him to breakfast. And when he arrives, she's still asleep. And when she does wake up, she just rolls out of bed and she goes outside and sits while he eats breakfast with her grandma. So it's just kind of awkward. Afterwards, they do go out walking and talk, but still, it was just kind of odd. And in the book, she's there visiting her grandma, who lives in Andorra. In the movie, though, there's RVs that travel through town, and Becky and her grandma are part of it. However, while passing through Andorra, the truck breaks down and they are stranded there for a week or so. When talk of repairing the truck comes up, or whenever the grandma is trying to start it, and it either is or isn't working, I enjoyed the emotions that were shown by both Gilbert and Becky. They obviously don't want the truck to be fixed because when it is, it means Becky has to leave. I think the character Becky is the only one that I liked better in the movie. She wasn't annoying and she complemented Gilbert's personality, whereas the Becky in the book was just annoying 90% of the time. And moving on to Mama's death. So in both, Mama goes upstairs to sleep on her bed, something she hasn't done in months, if not years, because as I said, she would sleep in the living room. When they go back up there, Amy and Gilbert go back up there and they find she has died. In the movie, they have Arnie go up and he's the one who finds she has died. And this was a great change because DiCaprio is so incredible in this scene. It is so heartbreaking and truly amazing acting on DiCaprio's part. And as far as the rest, I like how the book handled it. As they sit around Mama, Gilbert says to her, You know they will need to use a crane to get you out of here. And Amy asks what he's saying, and he says nothing. And Gilbert in both the book and the movie says how he won't let her be a joke. And this is a callback to earlier when his mortician friend Bob tells him and Tucker how they will make fun of the naked dead bodies. And Bob says how it's harmless because no one can hear and the person is dead anyway. And so Gilbert knows that his mom will be the brunt of so many jokes, and he refuses to let that happen. Without explaining, he starts collecting things and taking them outside. Amy understands, and she starts doing the same. And without explaining one by one, each grape understands what needs to be done, and they start moving things outside. Larry and Gilbert then go in and toss gasoline and light the match. The movie has the same ending, basically, or like has the same thing happen, basically, but there is more explaining. And Larry also isn't there. So the movie ties up the very end by going forward a year and explaining what everyone is up to. The sisters moved to some other city where Amy got a job, and Gilbert and Arnie joined Becky and her grandma in their travels. Whereas the book simply ends with the house burning, and that's that. Both endings are fine. I don't mind that the movie tells you what happens, but I'm also fine with the book not telling us. I guess because you know they're all going to be okay, and so it didn't worry me not being told what they were doing. And there's a line from the book that I thought was really beautiful, which reads, "I'm not saying we all of a sudden decided that our mother was a Saint Mary, but even though she was angry, even though she was so fat, she was our mother. And we could see in each of us a trace of her. And we knew in some weird way that she wasn't gone. She had just moved into us, and now it was time for us to move on." And now switching gears here and talking about Mrs. Carver. So the biggest change in regard to Gilbert's affair with a married woman is that her husband didn't know it was happening in the book. The movie doesn't straight out say he knows, but it definitely implies it. And also in the book, Mr. Carver himself was having an affair with his secretary. He and Gilbert do interact in the book because Mr. Carver is who Gilbert uses for his car insurance, whereas in the movie, Mr. Carver is always trying to meet with Gilbert, but it seems like it's his way of giving Gilbert a hard time because he suspects that he's sleeping with his wife. And in both he dies. Mr. Carver dies by drowning in a kiddie pool, though some suspect foul play. In the book, we also learn that this has been going on with Mrs. Carver for 7 years. However, in the beginning of the book, he is telling her he wants to end things with her, similar to how it is in the movie. One scene in the movie I really liked is when Mrs. Carver is in the store saying bye to Gilbert, and as she leaves, she tells Becky, "He's all yours." I felt like that line was kind of sassy, as if she was saying, like, "Enjoy my sloppy seconds." But regardless, when she leaves, Becky asks if he will miss her, and Gilbert says yes. And I love this scene because Gilbert was honest, and because Becky likes the fact that he will miss her. It shows that he has feelings and cares and is a nice person. Becky could have been jealous when he said that, but instead she has a more mature look on it. And in the book, there is a part in particular where he is thinking of all the things he will miss about Mrs. Carver. And so this scene in the movie also kind of sums up those thoughts he'd had. Even though he doesn't get specific in the movie, he acknowledges that he will miss her, and the look on his face shows his sincerity and the feelings he had for her. So book or the movie, I will get straight to it and say I like the book better. The movie is a great adaptation though, and there are some changes they made that I do like. I just really loved how we could better see the changes made in Gilbert in the book, and we're able to see in his head. I also liked the more fleshed out characters books always have. I had seen the movie before, and I don't remember being particularly touched by it, which is why I was surprised when I realized how much I liked the book. The ending was just so perfect, and even though it doesn't tie things up with telling us what happens from there, it ties things up in the more important ways, which is showing the internal changes that have taken place. And as I said, I didn't need to know what happened with Gilbert or anyone else because I knew they would be okay. As always, there's still a lot more in the book and the movie I didn't touch on. Lance, for example, plays a bigger part in the book, whereas he isn't even in the movie. However, that is one change I'm totally fine with because he wasn't a necessary character. The book also goes more into how Gilbert hates things that are changing and new and corporate things that are coming in and taking over the small town stuff. His loyalty to Lampson's grocery is legitimate, and he truly does stand by the small town things, even though he wants more than anything to get out. And speaking of Lampson's grocery, I enjoyed reading about the relationship he had with Mr. Lampson and viewing him as a father figure. The movie also shows how close they were, and I liked their scenes together. Both also have the scene where Mama goes into town to pick Arnie up from jail, which I didn't mention, but the scene is pretty similar in both the book and the movie. So even if you have seen the movie and thought it was just meh, I would recommend the book, and maybe you'll have the same feelings about it as I did. The movie, though, also is worth watching for DiCaprio's performance, if nothing else, as well as Darlene Cates. Like, this was her first ever movie role, so she is really good. Anyway, I guess that wraps it up, and now you know what was Eating Gilbert Grape. Join me next week for Black Klansman, so I will see you then. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, head over to my site, whythebookwins.com. You can leave a comment there and I will be sure to reply. You can also find me on Instagram under the same name, Why the Book Wins, and you can message me there, and don't forget to follow. And also don't forget to subscribe to my podcast and join me next Wednesday for the newest episode of Why the Book Wins.